You're listening in on an animated discussion about Batman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from the Cinematropolis.com, and today's topic is the Season 1 episode, Underdwellers.
Joshua, we just launched this podcast. I was really excited when you pitched the idea to me, but I think this might be the last episode of the show.
Really? Are we about to get beef over the Underdwellers?
Listen, I mean, you were just so passionate about wanting to do this episode, and I was so excited to do it, and then I was like, oh, Joshua's passionate about something that's not very good.
Oh, listen, I'm passionate about a lot of things that aren't very good, so that's not that shocking. Unfortunately for you, Underdwellers isn't one of them.
Oh.
That's right.
All right, so you know what, Josh? Let's go ahead and talk this out. I want to stay friends here. I want us to be friends.
Well, let's see how this goes. So first, I'll dive into a little bit of style talk, as I usually do with the title card.
Oh, that's good. You know, the styling is really good. This is actually an area we might agree on.
I'm working on not starting some sort of ultimate what is the best title card list in my own head. I'm just staying away from it and talking about each individual one. But this one is pretty excellent. We've discussed before about the noir stylings of this show, and that really comes to play here with the stark contrast between this light streaming in and the dark shadows. But different than most noir pieces, that contrast tends to come from neon lights through Venetian blinds. This is sunlight coming through a sewer grate, creating a shadow in which, is that a person? Is that a pile of rags? What is that hiding in the shadow? Right. We don't know, but we will know by the end of the episode, and that will just come back and make it all very powerful.
Yeah, Joshua, I think that's a great point. And by the way, I'm sure if any of your patrons out there would love to see a title card ranking from you, I would also love to read that list. But no, I think this is a really great title card because it teases the episode. It hits the thematics visually. You hit on some of the themes. What lies beneath the Underdwellers? What is going on? You have the bright daylight of Gotham, which is a dark city, but still, like, you have what's going on the surface.
The sun still comes up sometimes,
right?
Yeah.
It still comes up sometimes, but underneath the surface of Gotham is this great dark underbelly, and I think this title card specifically hits on that really well.
My favorite part of that is not just how well it speaks to this particular episode, but how well it adapts those noir stylings to something that I can't say nobody ever did, but it's the same thing. It's the bars of light cutting into shadow, which they do a million times, but this time we're going to do it with a sewer grate. This time it's going to be the actual sun. And that those changes do not actually fundamentally change the way it looks, but they change what it means.
Right.
And that is so good. That is rock solid stuff.
Right. And I do think, the Underdwellers, immediately obvious from the title card what this episode is going to be about. So I think that's a great tease in that way too. Ooh, we're gonna go to the sewers. What's in the sewers of Gotham? Well, let's find out. No, it's not sharks for Batman to punch. Although he does punch some other things down there.
There are animals for punching. It's fine.
We'll get into that in a little bit. But one other thing about the style I really wanted to hit on is we've already talked about in previous episodes about how this is a very noir influenced show. This episode, the stylings are still there, but I think especially once Batman gets to the sewers, we're in like some sort of whimsy, dark fantasy. I'm talking like the Black Cauldron was the first thing that came to mind because you're featuring these children. There's even leprechauns, air quotes, these magical creatures, and it's like dark crystal, kind of that weird late 80s, early 90s dark fantasy. It's like, ooh. I mean, it's whimsical, but it's also like, oh, there's dark things going on here. Like when the children are walking from room to room, you see these really dark reds that are reflecting. It's like, and you can't see what's on the other side, so it's super creepy. It's almost like they're marching right to the gates of hell or something along those lines. I just thought it was one of my favorite parts of this episode because beneath Gotham, beneath the noir, is this dark fantasy. Like once you go to the sewers, it's this weird alternate reality that they're in.
Without going too far into my armchair folklorist space, so many of your fairy folk type tales out of Wales, out of Ireland, out of England, they're people that dwell under hills. They are literally underdwellers. You would go to the other world by stepping through a cave or a portal or something like that, and then you would be in a place that was familiar but also completely different and dangerous and possibly beautiful, but usually very terrifying.
But yeah, exactly. It's like beautiful, but it's just creepy, and you're like, oh man, this is uncomfortable. Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. So for me, I would say the style of this episode is actually one of its strengths because it does create that whole alternate reality, alternate world that we're in. Unfortunately, it's a very dark and terrible place, especially for children.
Right. And that's why I loved your comparison to something like the Dark Crystal or the Black Cauldron, because those are all things that I saw when they were more or less new, and they effing terrified me.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I was exactly the right age and had exactly the fertile enough amount of imagination to be terrified by those things. And I was a little older when I saw this episode, but that didn't help because there's some stuff going on in this episode that I wouldn't have understood at the age that I was seeing Dark Crystal and Black Cauldron.
Right. Well, yeah, I think both of those stories do have those really darker, more mature themes there, but you're not going to understand those when you're 8 or 9 years old. Versus this, if you see this as how old were you when this episode came out?
Oh, let's see, 90. What did we decide? This would be 93.
92 or 93.
92, 93. Teenager? Let's leave it there.
Okay, yeah. Leave it there. That's good. The ambiguity is great. But yeah, you're at that point where you're ready for some more sophisticated material. Yeah. And this episode does have some of those same dark themes that are very, very clear from the narrative. It's very at the surface. And honestly, in my opinion, we'll get this in a minute, it's a little heavy-handed. But they're there. And you're at that age where you're like, I'm ready to digest some heavier stuff, kind of like the same material, but the same material you had as a kid, but you're ready for it now.
Recontextualized a little bit, bring some of that more out. It also nods towards its other influences. I don't think it's a mistake that you have a bunch of cloaked children you have a very Victorian style outfit for the Sewer King.
Right.
Like, we're doing Dickensian things here.
Oh, yeah.
Make no mistake. He is the eviler Fagin. Fagin's not a good guy,
no.
but Sewer King is
eviler.
The eviler.
He's
Fagin.
eviler thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you get that with I think it's an ulster coat or ulster cloak, kind of like Sherlock Holmes would wear, where you have this long coat or cloak with also an over-the-shoulder part to be even warmer and more waterproof. You got that kind of thing going on. Cravats, all that stuff. We're nodding at Dickensian things.
Right.
So...
Right. I dig it, yeah. So there's a lot, and I think stylistically, there's a lot of really great things going on here. But let's go ahead and
note that he keeps talking about the style because that's the part we can agree on.
Listen, we're going to talk about this is how I do reviews, Joshua. I talk about the things I like first, and then now the gloves are going to be off. Because let's go ahead and kick things off with the story corner. I want to know, before we go down to the specifics, what was it you liked about the story here?
I'm on record as a pro Batman and Robin guy. Robin is great. He is the best thing that happened to Batman, and Batman and Robin is the wave of the future. It should always be the two of them. But part of that is that Batman saves kids. He understands what it is to be a traumatized child. When he puts on the Batman costume, it is at the highest level to fight crime. But you dig just a little bit deeper from there, and it's so that nobody has to go through the thing that I went through. So the fact that it opens with him saving kids from just being dumb kids and ends with him saving kids from a person who has made themselves monstrous, that's stuff I really like. I like the saving kids aspect.
Again, this is very cool. I like those things too. Here's the thing. These are all things I like. The thing that bothers me about this episode is it does come across, because this is good. Batman would relate to children, especially in these kind of very dark circumstances, these abusive relationships, or maybe orphan children. Of course he's going to relate with them in a way because he lost his parents at a young age, and really, as you said, this is why he does what he does, because he doesn't want other children to go through this. And I think that element that they try to work in here is really great. I think that idea is really great. My problem is it's just very heavy-handed. I feel like at every point in the story, it's like, okay, I know this audience is technically geared towards children, so maybe that's why we're being very outward about the fact that this is about abusive relationships. We're very outward about how Batman very clearly can work with children. And there's even a mantra at the end where he's got the Sewer King on the train. I felt like Batman would never talk like this. I'm not the courts. We're going to send you to the courts to render the verdict, but you're pushing me real hard. And we all know that's what Batman's about. We know that he won't kill people. We know that he's not the executioner. We get that, right?
Do we know? I feel like there are people who may be involved in Batman media that aren't aware of this fact.
Zack Snyder might have skipped that.
I wasn't going to name names.
Frank Miller might have skipped that one. But
eventually.
Yeah. I just feel like generally consensus, I think most people would say Batman doesn't kill people. While he's about that, I don't feel like he would ever just straight up say that to a guy he's thinking about killing. It's more about show, don't tell. Show us what Batman's about. And we also have Kevin Conroy, who again, this is early on in his performance as Batman. doesn't sell it quite hard enough, and also like the whole premise of that scene is just really tough for me to swallow. Like there's a million other ways they could have had a final confrontation between Batman and the Sewer King that would have resolved in the same outcome, that would have been less like, ooh, on the nose, I am not the law, I am not the verdict, I'm not going to render the verdict. It was a little much.
I'm going to take these a little separately because we can agree definitely about that final scene, that final confrontation scene between Batman and the Sewer King. If we had gotten this episode in the tail end of the 36 episodes that's the first season, or even second season, when they had definitely hit their stride, and Kevin Conroy, who really hit the ground running with the voice acting,
yeah,
but
great.
had not perfected it yet.
Right.
I would have liked to have seen this staged a little bit differently, so that the rage that I think they're trying to get across, that Batman is on the edge of doing something terrible that even breaks his own code because these are children, would have been sold better.
Right.
That side, I completely agree, is heavy-handed. On the side of the children and their abusive relationship, I actually think that that's a fairly deft touch.
Okay.
Because they never say the words abusive relationship. Nobody ever looks at the camera and says adults shouldn't treat children this way. And maybe this is an age difference between us in that I can remember those after-school specials.
Because it does feel like, I mean, again, this definitely feels like an after-school special, but I will say it's not like nearly after-school specials. They just talk to the screen. They'll tell you.
Right.
This doesn't do that. So I think in comparison to after-school specials,
right,
this is certainly it is less on the nose than you would get like at an after-school or a dare session or whatever, you know.
The idea that a child who is in an abusive relationship or someone who is friends with that child might see that abusive relationship and make the connection between the way Sewer King acts and the way that the authority figure in that relationship acts and realize that is what bad people do, and Batman is not for it, is, I feel, this is both me talking as a person who remembers 80s after-school specials when they were actually on, and has a child at home. I want to get these lessons in there in a more subtle way.
Right.
And the idea that he might, I mean, my son watched this episode with me, that he might see an adult treat one of his friends in a way where they make the child very indebted to them over tiny slights or imaginary slights, where the adult throws temper tantrums in an effort to get a reaction from the kid and then makes it the kid's fault. Those things are never called out specifically as, air quotes, child abuse. But at the same time, they're things you could see an abusive person doing. And because Batman said no, you can say no. Or you'll know to go and tell your parent, I think this is the thing. It's definitely more subtle than look for these signs and go tell a grown-up about them. And I think that's why it works better. I don't feel that that's as heavy-handed, but again, I remember after-school specials, and that
right,
may be,
right.
and this may be the trend towards new technology,
right,
and you're used to the new technology.
Well, I think there's a couple different things. One, I also had after-school specials, but it definitely wasn't the same as the 80s stuff.
Yeah,
you know, we had dare classes. It was all about drugs are bad, you know. And
I had to explain very special episodes to someone recently.
Right. Oh, wow.
That they were a thing that existed, because we don't do those anymore.
We don't. And I mean, and again, I think it's a cultural difference. And I think you raise a really great point, though. A couple things that I'll totally give you credit for. One, you're a dad. You're having to think about that, and you're not thinking about, oh, just, well, I like this episode. You're thinking, what is a lesson I can show my son, and what's the value of this episode to my son who's younger? And FYI, I think this is very subtle, and if I was a child, I think this would actually work a lot better because it doesn't feel so heavy-handed, because it is very clearly a moral of the story type thing, but it's showing you, not telling you, like an after-school special. And while I do feel like as a 20-something viewer who's very critical about the way they present, it does feel heavier-handed than I would like. I've also had 20-some-odd years of like seeing stuff like this to kind of get more critical about it. So I think, to kind of sum it all up, I think, especially for children, I think this would be a great tool as a dad if I wanted to show people about abusive relationships between adults and children, or parents and adults. Josh, I'll totally give you credit for that, because I think this is just a context thing. I'm single in my 20s, and I love picking things apart, and it just was one of those. I was like, of all the Batman episodes, I feel like they've done similar things better in other episodes, and maybe they have, but I do think there is some real value here.
Very interestingly, I'm in my own head as two different people with this, because I mentioned before that this was one that disturbed me a lot as a kid. It hit home in a way that stuck with me, that I can't tell you I guarantee I saw an after-school special about abusive parents or abusive adults. Do not remember it. This episode I remember, and it sticks with me. And it actually sticks with me from the recommendation that I will have at the end of the show.
Oh, very cool.
But yeah, now and then, so I'm holding that in mind, that this was a 12, 13-year-old Josh disturber. And also, how can I use this thing now on my very impressionable child to make sure that he understands these are not the way things are supposed to be?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it clearly had an impact on you, and like that's another thing. Like, hey, it impact on me. It helped me. Maybe I can share that with my son. I think I don't know. That's really valuable and sweet, and I do think this is a series you can do that with. So it's great.
Mixed into Batman fighting a bunch of crocodiles, so he never gets bored.
Okay.
My son.
I'm glad you brought. I'm super glad you brought the crocodiles up, because that's the other thing I want to pick a bone with. Okay, on paper and even in the animation, it's fun, but Batman, I guess, killed one of the sewer crocodiles. I think he pulled
At
the
least
jaw
one.
open at least one. I mean, and I this is still not a big deal to some people, and I'm not even, guys, I'm not PETA, I promise, I really don't care that much, but it's just a difference between where we're at with TV and animation and film in 2017 versus 92. Like, today, I feel like people on a kid's cartoon, your superhero just like straight up killing an animal, everyone would be like, ooh, that's kind of mean, versus in 92, totally acceptable. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm not a big PETA person at all. Like, I like animals, but I'm not like crazy passionate about it. I just think it's...
I still eat them, for instance.
Of course.
Honestly, I eat meat.
I eat meat for dinner, where lunch we're probably going to eat some meat somewhere.
It's happening.
Yeah, I just say to say, I think it's a really interesting, again, drawing more comparisons between television in 1992, 93 versus 2017. I just feel like it's a weird thing that would not fly nearly as well today.
It was a little brutal. I do feel like there's a space where you can wiggle and say that it somehow knocked the alligator out or the crocodile out, only because there's no noise. So there's not even like a bone crack noise. It's a musical sting,
right?
And then it just lays there.
Well, that's why that whole scene was weird. I was confused. Like, did he just kill it? I honestly don't know. I'm asking the real question. Did he just kill it?
Did he just kill it? Let's say no.
Yeah.
Because up till then it had been he hogtied one,
right,
kicked one over his head. Now that one was bearing down on him to bite him. So would we blame him if he killed the crocodile? But no, it is.
Yeah, again. It's like one of those things. Like, it's not even. I don't even want to touch the ethics of it. I just think it's a really weird presentation thing. I was like, I don't think we'd see that on television on on children's programming in 2017.
Probably not.
Just because the sensibilities are a little different. But yeah. Batman fighting sewer crocodiles. That's pretty cool. I think it's fun.
Can't be beat.
Especially if we're going back to the early 90s, where people actually believed that there were crocodiles in the sewers of New York. You remember that?
I like your optimism that people still don't believe that.
I'm sure they do. But back at the time, there were like 3 sci-fi movies about it. You remember that?
Yes, I do. I couldn't tell you the name of it. I vividly remember one where the little girl gets a baby crocodile, and I was traumatized by her parents flushing it down the toilet.
Oh, yeah.
And then it becomes the monster that comes back to haunt the community.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I mean, the closest thing I have, I watched those on
gator.
TV. I think it was like alligator. It was like one of those just alligator or something, right? A crocodile. But the one I watched, which was not in the city, so it was not nearly as weird, was the Lake Placid in the 90s.
Oh, yes.
That was a fun one. But not to get too far off topic, bring it back to Batman. But yeah, I think that was a fear. There was a weird stint in the the mid 80s to like the mid 90s where everyone was all about like fear of alligators and crocodiles. So
it's a beautiful thing. I have very recently integrated the idea of giant sewer crocodiles into fiction that I write. So it's a thing that before I saw this episode. So it's a thing that keeps cropping up. And I am perpetuating that urban myth as we speak.
I think one thing we can talk about is looking kind of at this cracked mirror, right? So how does the villain of this story reflect Batman? We've already talked about it a little bit, but so this is an abusive parent, right?
Yes,
versus we've got Batman who has lost his parents. I think obviously that's kind of the angle that shows the foil he's supposed to represent. Well, Batman didn't have parents. Well, here's what an abusive parent looks like, and Batman's not about that.
Yeah, he's about taking care of kids one way or the other. And we skipped Christmas with the Joker, but it does establish that he has a Robin who's now in college.
Chronologically, we're going to talk about this in other episodes, I'm pretty sure, but like we don't know where any of this falls chronologically because apparently it's still very early in Batman's career, but Robin's in college. Anyway,
it's complicated.
Yeah.
We can play with a 5-year window here, but you have in this fiction established that he has taken an orphan in and raised him. And because you and I know going forward, he will do it again with another orphan that becomes Robin. And in between there's Barbara Gordon, who is not an orphan, who has a strong parental presence in Commissioner Gordon. But Bruce Wayne is going to become like a second father to her. This is a thing that he does And he equips them to be powerful, strong defenders of others. And here you have a guy who takes these children in and abuses them into being despoilers of others for his own enrichment.
Beats them down. It's pretty rough, too. They're not even allowed to talk. Yikes.
Right. They have to be silent. They are made to be afraid of the light. If you want to talk about on-the-nose metaphors, I'm fine with that one because it's pretty good. But the Sewer King is, in that respect, very much Batman's opposite number. Let us exploit these orphans instead of caring for these orphans.
Absolutely. So I think that's kind of the angle there. I will say about the Sewer King, I think he's awfully generic. BTAS is known for creating truly iconic characters that would work themselves into the Batman canon.
Or taking established villains and giving them a different or even more iconic look. Mark Hamill's Joker is the Joker.
Right.
The Two-Face that we're going to look at is an amazing version of Two-Face.
I mean, honestly, I would say for a lot of people the definitive version of Two-Face. And you've got Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze, who was a throwaway character before this.
Did not even have an origin before he appears on BTAS.
And it becomes one of the most tragic and memorable Batman villains ever. So, I mean, I think this show's great. Not so much here. I think the Sewer King is awfully generic. I like the styling of him. I think the idea,
yes.
Conceptually, he's
works.
an interesting, right? But I there's nothing about him that other than the cool trench coat he's got on. I just was like, hey, he's designed to be an abusive parent or an abusive adult, and that's about all we got. There's not really any nuance to him at all.
No, I agree. I mean, somebody said evil or Fagin and knocked off early that day,
right?
And it's fine. The thing that surprised me as the comic book lover, the deep comic book reader at this table, the thing that surprised me is that Sewer King is not some toss-off villain from the Silver or Bronze Age.
He does feel like one, doesn't he?
He feels like he totally could be one, and he's not. He was originally made for BTAS, and good news, you'll never see him again.
Yeah, there we go. I'm glad that you like this episode. You've on there.
Like is hard because it really disturbs me. Now it disturbs me also as a parent, right? Like thinking about my poor precious lamb finding himself in this kind of a situation. It disturbs me with the same themes in a completely different way. Here we are 25 years later.
You have helped me see some value, even though it might not apply to myself directly. I'm seeing, okay, there is some real value here. I do think some of these themes in this episode down the line will be, they'll do them better, I think, in one form or another.
I agree. Yeah.
This is still an early episode, so again, I think addressing these themes later in different ways, I think is great. But you raised some great points on the value of being able to showcase themes to more impressionable audiences who technically, I mean, as adult and mature and brilliant as the show was still made for children.
Ostensibly made for children.
Yes.
Which is why, before we move past all the characters, I want to just touch on Frog.
Oh, please do. Yes, Frog.
Because there are two things about Frog that I love so much. And one of them is the Artful Dodger nonsense going on at Wayne Manor, where he, I guess partly Orphan Annie and partly Artful Dodger, because he's just refusing to take a bath and is just a big handful for Alfred. And that's a dose of comedy kind of in the middle of this otherwise pretty heavy episode. And then the Artful Dodger stuff when he is just stuffing his shirt full of silverware and salt and pepper shakers, whatever he can get his hands on. And then when he runs down the hall, they're just falling out. Like he's way bitten off more than he can chew as a thief. And then at the end, he saves his friend, and he does it swinging around in the most Batman way possible. And I'll talk about my kid again. He was 100% convinced Frog was going to be the new Robin, even though he kind of knows enough Batman mythology that wasn't going to happen.
I was going to say, did you bust the bubble with the end? You're like, hey son, I hate to tell you, but Frog, he never comes back, and he's not Robin.
Oh, I mean, kind of. I just said, all the Robins, and that none of them are named Frog, and he was like, we don't know his name yet. And I was like, okay, you got me. But then Tim Drake is his favorite, and so when we got to the end and I said we will eventually get to episodes with Tim, he was fine. He was utterly mollified.
Okay, very good. All right, Joshua. Well, I think that's all I've got to say about Underdwellers. Do we want to wrap up?
Yeah, I think I've hit all the points. So I'm going to put you on the spot since I actually came prepared with a recommendation this time.
Oh, sure.
Assuming that people enjoyed the Underdwellers and wanted to see some piece of fiction with some of the same themes or what have you, what would you suggest?
Black Cauldron, I think, is a great piece of animation. And then I'd also recommend Dark Crystal. Again, I really do feel like this is like their own spin on this dark fantasy because they don't get to do that a whole lot in this show because it's Batman. It's more grounded. But it just kind of created that. I just felt the 80s animation, that dark 80s animation so much.
And Dark Crystal's going to get a revival or a sequel or something. I'm not sure. I've heard that much news.
I'm
That's
very
about
excited.
all I
Yes,
know.
it is going to do something, and I'm all about it. Love the puppets. Love puppets. So I'm really glad.
It can scar me all over again.
I was a huge Muppets fan, so anything with Jim Henson name on it, whether it's even based on, I'm all over it. And then the last one, oh man, I can't remember the episode. I feel bad. There's an episode of Hey Arnold that is very similar. They go down to the sewers, and there's a guy in the sewers who is wearing a really bad cape, and he's got this big wand, and he's like chasing them around the sewers and stuff.
He's like a sewer wizard.
Sewer wizard, exactly. Except for he's actually just crazy,
right.
But it's a very similar premise, but without any of the. It's more fun. It has none of the, at least not that as I recall, has any of the commentary. And it was in the earlier seasons of Hey Arnold. I'm so sorry I don't have the name of that episode. I would start looking at season 1. I love Hey Arnold. It's a great show.
My recommendation is, in some ways, surprising, but also very on the nose. A novel that came out around the same time as this episode, but they have nothing to do with one another. It was just about that time in my life, called Batman Ultimate Evil. It is a prose novel that focuses on a present-day Batman mystery that he actually solves with the assistance of his mother's records and diaries, because in the terms of this novel, you find out that Martha Wayne spent her time working as a social worker, helping children who were in abusive relationships. It's pretty dark. But it is, if you like this theme and would like to see it treated in a more young adult or adult fashion, I would recommend Batman, The Ultimate Evil.
Oh, that sounds really great.
Well, I think this has been a great animated discussion about On Leather Wings. Caleb, where can people go to continue the conversation with you?
Well, you can always find me on Twitter talking about film, television, and all manner of other sorts of pop culture goodness at C Masters Talk. On Twitter, again, that's at letter C Masters Talk. I'm also the editor-in-chief at a film website that specializes in in-depth critique and analysis of film, thecinematropolis.com. And we publish essays on all types of films, good comic book movies, all that good stuff, including some thoughts from my co-host Joshua here. And you can find all of those at thecinematropolis.com. Joshua, what about you?
I'm also most active on Twitter, where you can find me easily enough, at Joshua Unruh. I'm happy to field any superhero questions you might have, and who knows, it might even become a podcast unto itself. I'll also keep you in the loop on any fiction, articles, podcasts, or diatribes I cast out into the world, including my work at the Cinematropolis and for Pulp Diction Productions and Press.
Join us next time for Be a Clown, where we find out exactly how well Batman can clown around with the Joker, and that's going to be episode 9 of the first season of Batman the Animated Series.
Until next time, we'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel. Animated Discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. And if you can't support us financially, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It's the best way to help others discover the show. Keep up with Pulp Diction news by following at Joshua Unruh on Twitter, or find us at facebook.com/pulpdictionproductions.